All is good.
Good. Thank you, Catherine. Yes. Thank you, Catherine, for organizing this and for choosing this topic. I couldn't think of a more important topic, and I really wanted to share some material that has to do with the development of emotion. Very little is talked about with regards to how emotional development takes place. Uh, we know that emotion is important now. There is much focus on it today, and rightfully so. Uh, we are creatures of emotion. Our students have emotions. Their well-being is absolutely important, and so it is wonderful that is being taken into consideration. But at the same time, there is very little understanding as to how emotions develop and how we best help that development. Now, most approaches, if they're not informed by a developmental understanding, will intervene at the level of symptoms rather than at the root of the problem. And the problem with this is that it ignores all the steps that come before the kind of emotional maturity that we are seeking, the kind of self-control, self-reflection, empathy, consideration that we are seeking for our students. And because of this, educators and counselors are actually at risk for making things worse for many of their students, especially those who are troubled in one way or another. Or are more immature. And so I thought it's so important that there's a foundation of this material. I am a developmentalist. And as a developmentalist, of course, we're always concerned about what nature's plan is. And so I put all the pieces together into a course that I've called the 5 steps towards emotional health and maturity. And so I've taken from that course to bring this to you today with applying it specifically with students in mind. I thought that we should just take a little bit of time coming to an understanding of what we are talking about in emotion, because even though there's a whole science of emotion now, unfortunately, emotion has been discounted, thrown under the bus, so to speak, for so many years, centuries, really, ever since John Locke basically stated that women and children are way too emotional, and that's a problem with them. Is that we've had this focus that emotion is irrational, that there's something wrong with it, despite what we know now, which is completely contrary to that. And so, first of all, starting with the definition, emotion is to move or be moved. Latin, to motion, move, to move or be moved. In other words, it speaks to the inner springs of behavior, either 2 definitions: to be moved or stirred up. So when we talk about being moved, this is so important. It refers to the inner springs to movement that come from inside, the kind of pre-programming, if you like, the auto motivation, if you like, that happen to us. So emotions can be thought of nature's innate plan or built instructions of how we should be moved when something happens and the resulting effects. And so it's important to keep that in mind, as the inner springs is what happens to us. Now, as opposed to reason, emotion has often been perceived to be irrational and thus inferior, which eclipses the more salient issue that the brain has its reasons. And so simply to define it as irrational eclipses the point that we now know emotion is on purpose. It's not accidental. It's on purpose. It's not a leftover vestigial part of our animal nature. It's on purpose. We are creatures of emotion, and the brain is trying to take care of us in some way. And so instead of dismissing it, we should be looking to, oh, I don't get it. What is it trying to do? And that isn't being taken into consideration in today's social emotional learning, empathy programs, and so on, is the fact that there's no recognition that emotion needs to be listened to, respected. We need to understand it before we go to control it. It is, when we look at it in terms of the opposite of an instinct, or how it fits into it, emotion basically increases the reach of instinct. Instinct was there first from an evolutionary point of view, and so it increases the reach. Now, instinct is also inner springs, and so there's difficulty figuring out when does instinct ends, when do emotion begins. Often, spiders have an instinct for webs, and birds to build nests, but spiders don't have emotion. We're now thinking that birds do have emotion, but how do we differentiate? It's not always easy. But instinct is the older auto-motivational system, and so underlies most of our emotion. Even our brain is built in such a way is that emotion kind of surrounds the building of it, and the neocortex, the thinking part, is the final part on it. So there's much confusion between instinct and emotion. And the really big issue, the big issue that's only come to light in the last 10 years as we've struggled to create a science of emotion, is that we didn't have proper language to differentiate between a feeling and emotion because they're used as synonyms. Now, so feeling is an optional aspect of emotion. That is, the brain takes care of us by moving us in certain ways. It's on purpose. And we could look at all the different emotions. They all move us in certain ways. But we don't necessarily feel them. In fact, that is a whole development in itself, to be able to feel our emotions. And if you could think of this in a way if you could close your eyes for a moment and just feel what is around you with your fingers. Just feel it, and if there's a breeze or anything like that with your skin, so you feel it. Now, that feedback is going into the brain for the brain to interpret. What is it that you feel? What's the shape of it? And so on. And so it's blind, so to speak. So feeling is blind, and then it's feedback from what is happening, in this case, in the body, and then it's interpreted by the brain. And so our best way of thinking of cognition is an interpretation that is informed by feeling. But if the feeling isn't there, then the brain can't make sense of it and makes all kinds of mistakes. And anxiety is one of those big mistakes it makes. It displaces it because we don't feel it. Boredom is one of those big mistakes because we're not actually feeling the whole, the shape of the whole. Is it that I miss my grandmother? Is it that I do? And so it doesn't feel inside properly. And so if you think of this, the mistakes that can be made, my brain makes a mistake in that that I can feel hollow inside, or an ache, or an emptiness. And instead of, I never feel bored, so my brain doesn't go, I'm bored, but it does go, oh, yes, empty inside, you must be hungry, it's time to eat. And in fact, when I'm traveling, because I miss my loved one so much, my brain is saying it's always time to eat. And so you can see the way it misinterprets things, the feedback that it's getting, it can't quite make sense of it, and so on. And so it's very important to differentiate between feeling and emotion. Otherwise, we really can't talk about it. So we need a language of this. And so I want to challenge you to stop using them as synonyms. And as you stop using them as synonyms, you begin to understand the differentiations. Now, we know that emotion is at the heart of things. That is what is very, very clear. Not thinking, That comes later. A 2- and 3-year-old, there is it is all about emotion, and infant is all about emotion. As a developmentalist, we always talk about what is at the beginning, and it is at the heart of things. And many do not realize how much at the heart of things emotion is. And so I just want to review this very quickly. Number one, emotion is in charge of managing the brain. It actually is the one that sets the priority. When we do this, when we do that, what are the tasks that are there? What are the problems that need to be solved? In fact, emotion is in charge of developing the brain, pruning out the neural networks that are no longer needed, attention and memory. So all of these problems have emotion if there are problems, they have emotion at the heart of them. That is huge. And most, as I said, most problems in learning, attention, maturation are rooted in emotion. The stress response is an emotional response. That is the very essence of it. And so it follows that adaptation, which includes healing and recovery, is an emotional response. Our ability to be changed by the things that we cannot change or transformed is totally emotional. It goes from inside out. It's not cognitive. It is emotional. And when you're young, there's not even any cognitive support for adaptation, because a child, there's no cognitive support for what doesn't work in young children and in immature children. Excuse me. Emotional processes precede and undergird mental processes in evolution and development and in everyday functioning. Even the neural networks from emotion to cognition are much greater than the opposite, cognition to emotion. So while it is true as adults, our thinking does influence our affect, it is much more true that our affect influences our thinking. It's not that both exist, but when the child is alarmed because of facing separation from mother, the 3-year-old and 4-year-old, they are alarmed, and the brain then makes sense of this, that there must be something bigger than you that's threatening you, that is hidden, that we can't see, so there's monsters under the bed. And in other words, the child isn't afraid because there's monsters under the bed. The child is there's monsters under the bed because a child is alarmed. And that's so important. The cognition is there more to interpret than as a causative effect. Mental processes then are primarily derivatives of emotion rather than the other way around. It is so unfortunate the construct of mental illness got out of the gate because it was basically a very few psychiatrists who were at this and who did not give. And to this day, the DSM, the Bible of disorders, has no regard for emotion. It is not informed by the science of emotion. We should have stayed with emotional health, with having trouble with emotions, with emotional disturbance. We should have stayed that way. Then we wouldn't have the stigma problem as well. But it's too late now. We can't go to that. But it's important to remember that mental processes are primarily derivatives of emotion rather than the other way around. And almost all troubled thinking and behavior, including diagnoses, are found to have roots in emotion. For instance, almost every diagnosis is in one way or form a derivative, a variation of more emotion and less feeling. More emotion and less feeling. Anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, you could go on and on and on. And so it is better to think of them in terms of emotion, because again, the mental disorders, the doctrine of disorder is not sensitive to etiological, to factors of causes, but whether you match a particular diagnosis. And so it doesn't really ever get you to the root of the problem, whereas emotions is all about inner springs. And so we go to the root. We go to the root. The root will lie somewhere in emotion, but the root will almost always lie in instinct. And that's where most of attachment lies, is in instinct. To pursue, our instinct for togetherness, our instinct to resist being controlled by others, by those that we're not attached to, our instinct for shyness. It's all instinct, because this instinct we share with almost all other creatures. And then we have the extra emotion that builds on top of it as well. And so this is the best way of thinking of it then. Emotions need to be resolved to reduce symptoms as well as to affect deep and lasting changes. So the bottom line is, oh my goodness, emotion needs to emotion matters, so it needs to matter to us. It needs to matter to us. And so just a little bit about development then. Just a few insights about it, about development. Developmentalists always take their cues from what happens at the very beginning. Most theories, they try to figure out adults and then they visit back. Social emotional learning is an example of an adult theory that's visited upon children. Almost all theories are like this. A developmentalist starts at what happens for a toddler or preschooler and where we get stuck, and so what happens going forward. And we also go to other life forms, to life forms that are not as complex. The plant is a favorite life form from which developmentalists take their cues, because the plant, it's so clear that all the potential of the plant is rooted in attachment. The potential, you can never be too attached. You can be too insecurely attached. Your attachments are disrupted. If you pull at growth and you put the focus on maturation and the fruit, you endanger pulling a plant up by its roots. And so the idea that all potential that unfolds, the unfolding of it is all rooted in attachment. And everything is attached. Every cell in your body, every bone, that song about the bones being connected. If any part becomes detached, there is death to that part. If, of course, the plant becomes detached, there is death to that part. There's no life outside of attachment. And so it is a story of attachment. And that is exactly what we have understood. The whole thing is a story about attachment. Now, developmentalists have always loved putting things into the ideas of what comes before. And so they're used to using things like stages and phases, like steps here that I have. The problem is that people are too concrete in their thinking, and there was a huge movement in the United States that went from, well, what age is that, and what age is that, and what age is that, and so they went to put this in terms instead of what has to come before. A true developmental approach is not an age and stage theory. It is what comes before. So we understand adolescence, where there's no self-control, no empathy, and no consideration. And the question then is, well, what preceded it? What was meant to come before? And then you look at it and you say, oh, that's missing. From a developmental approach, you never go to battle symptoms. You always go to look at what preceded this. And so it's important. This is a theory about what must happen before, that. And in emotion, putting all the pieces together, there's about 4 things that need to happen before we get the ultimate result. Hence, 5 steps. 4 things to happen before we get the kind of evidence of maturation, emotional maturity that we want. And so basically, the basic idea of development is stages unfold spontaneously if and only if conditions are conducive. Okay. So what is the role then of an adult involved with a child? To remove the impediments, to provide the conditions. Growth is spontaneous like a plant. You can't instruct a geranium how to grow up. You can't instruct it how to have fruit. You've got to give it the conditions that are necessary. This is the mistake, because Daniel Goleman, when he came out to say, oh my goodness, emotions have intelligence, people got confused and they figured out we needed to have emotional intelligence. No, emotions were intelligent. They had a purpose. Then they got confused and said, and even Goleman himself did, and said, okay, then we've got to school the emotions. And that started the fact that, oh, we've got to have an extra curriculum for emotion so that individuals do. No, all growth is spontaneous if conditions are conducive. You don't have to have instructions. The problem is if you do not play midwife to what comes before, you can put development in great harm. And so what it got introduced to, and that's all Daniel Goleman knew, is learning theory. That is the opposite of developmental theory. That's all he knew, is that, and it's the dominant paradigm of the day. The idea is he interpreted it as a life skill. So some people's emotions were intelligent and not others. It turns out that all emotions are intelligent, but it requires a development that is there for a purpose. And there is artificial intelligence, you like, in this case, it's not artificial, it's real intelligence programmed that is there. But that's another big story. We won't have time to go into that. But no formal instruction, modeling, or skill acquisition is required. If developmental functioning or capacities are missing from a developmental approach, we always retreat. You retreat to preceding stages to address and resolve the stuckness. So you go to what was to happen before you saw the evidence of this. What is to happen before you see self-control? What is to happen? What is to happen before you see self-reflection and sharing your feelings to be able to realize emotional intimacy with whoever you share it to, and emotional maturation. And so retreat is the modus operandi, of course, for the developmental approach. Now, I'm going to give you the model here, and I will outline it. We could spend a whole lot of time on this. As I say, I have a 4-session course on this, but I will just go over it briefly, and that will set the stage for walking around it. The ultimate, what are we aiming for? Well, it is in human nature, it is in our nature. Every single human has the ability, the capacity, the inbuilt ability to reflect upon their emotions, their feelings, their instincts, their experience. To reflect means to bend back. This is what makes us distinctly human. It makes us distinctly humane. And the idea is that everyone has this potential, but far fewer realize this potential than have it. You'll know people that are not reflective at all. And so what is missing here? What is missing? Well, it turns out that though reflecting is what can lead to a lifelong growth through the lifespan. For instance, when we disclose what we have reflected upon in our experience, and that also allows for the highest potential intimacy. It itself is based upon the brain being able to deal with inner conflict. That inner conflict must be felt. And so it's based upon the idea that there's inner friction. Part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way. I am of two minds. I am thinking this way. And you'll know lots of kids, lots of adolescents, and you'll probably know adults who never say that. And so if there's no inner friction, if inner conflict cannot be felt, there's nothing to spark that reflection. Well, this conflict, there are whole developmental theories that are based around this conflict. It ends it ends up to be the motor of development. That is the key thing that you're looking for here. What has to happen before is that feelings can mix. Part of me feels mad, but part of me is really sad. Part of me feels angry about this, but I'm also alarmed. Part of me is in pursuit, but I want to be my own person. And so the feelings actually mix. Now, when I was working with troubled adolescents, troubled young adults, and there was no mix, none. They were absolutely certain. And you'll know a lot of politicians like this that are as certain and dogmatic as a 3 and 4-year-old. Why? Because all 4-year-olds are dogmatic. Why? Because there is no mixture. It requires part of the brain to develop, the prefrontal cortex. It doesn't even start developing until 5 to 7 years of age. So the mixing bowl of the brain is the last one to take shape, but it's got to be there to lead for reflection. And so it'd really be easy to, you look at your child and you say, do I see any evidence of mixed feelings? If they're before 5 years of age, it's really doubtful that you'll get any child saying, part of me, feels this way and part of me feels that way. If they're about 7 years of age, you should see plenty of examples when conditions are conducive, especially in hindsight. If you've got an adolescent who never says that, you've got an adolescent in emotional trouble. And so what is the fruit of this? Self-control and consideration. So what are we doing? Self-control and consideration are the goals of almost all social emotional learning programs and emotional intelligence programs and all emotional management programs today. We're aiming for the fruit. Now, there's going to be a problem with this, and I'll talk about it. The question would be, is what has to happen before? And if they have to mix. Feelings have to mix. Now, emotions can't mix. There's no ability in the brain for emotions to mix. There's a special place in the brain, the frontal cortex, which has to develop for where we feel an emotion, the feelings mix. And now the emotions automatically seek balance by mixing, but can only mix if developmentally ready. And what has to happen? Emotions have to be felt. Very simple. They have to mix before we can reflect. They have to be felt. So if a child isn't saying and isn't feeling, and I used to assume, because I could see the body language of emotion on everyone, I projected feeling into them, which is actually the original meaning of empathy. Is that when you project feelings into people where none occur, we do a great disfavor because we don't realize they're missing. You actually have to see, do they actually feel their alarm? Do they actually feel the hole that is inside? Do they feel the pursuit of proximity? Do they feel their possessiveness? Or are they just simply expressing that? Is that an emotion? They need to feel, and feelings need to be developed. That is, they will naturally, emotions seek to be conscious through feeling. That's a natural development, but conditions have to be conducive. And they can only be felt if it is safe and there is space. So what would need to happen before? We would have to give space for feelings to happen, for feelings to catch up on us. None of us feels very much when there's stress, when we're in our work mode. Our brain, when in the work mode, isn't even geared to feel. Feelings are something that must catch up on us. We must have an end of the day experience. We must have some place where it's safe. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that would be required. Then feelings will be spontaneous. And naming. I have to have a sense of what something is called. We're not conscious where we don't have a language for. So if a child has never heard the language of frustration, this isn't working for me, I'm very frustrated now, I have a hard time with this, then they won't understand or recognize frustration. If all they've ever heard is I'm pissed off, then that's the language they use, the language of rage or anger, but they don't have a language of frustration. So part of it is reinterpreting this part, yes. this. They need a language of the heart. Language needs to be learned. Yes, this is the part and the only part that needs to be learned, but it's learned in the context of attachment, not in social learning programs where you give handles to emotions, because that's not how we learn language. We learn it in the context of attachment. And what is at the fore? The number one law of emotion is it is put into action. We are charged for a purpose. And so when we are charged with the energy, now we know it as electricity, not steam, it requires a discharge. It seeks to be expressed. And if it isn't expressed, emotions must move like static electricity, must move to be felt. You can be full of static electricity and not feel it, but it must be safe enough from repercussions to be expressed. Here is a huge idea and a huge problem. And this I did not recognize at the beginning of my work, and almost everything. Where do things go wrong in this? At the beginning. At the beginning. At the very first step. If we were going to put our focus on anything, it would be to retreat to the beginning, the very first step. Now, what is the problem here? Well, as I said, we are programmed already with instinct. We are moved. The primary instinct is to togetherness. And there is a more evolved motivational system. We are moved by emotion. Emotion is meant to extend the reach. It is for much more complexity than instinct could ever bring us. And so that is what it is there. These are the two movements of the brain. That is how the nature takes care of us, by already pre-programming inner springs to movement. But there can be a problem. If our instincts are moving us in a direction that are opposite of our emotion, the brain has to make a sacrifice play. This may be at the root of almost all trouble in its thousands of manifestations. I believe we are getting to the place when we're almost ready to call it, this may be at the root. Now, what does it look like? Well, emotion needs to move. We know that. I'm going to give it a little personality here, put a hat on it, and because we know it has purpose and it needs to move. That's fine. But when it moves, those people we are depending upon it get a little bit offended. They focus on, come on, calm yourself down, control yourself. There's no room for this. That's not the way you treat this. Don't be so mean. And for reasons of attachment and togetherness, we go, get a hold of yourself. And the brain goes, oh my goodness. The attachments that this child has, the working attachments, cannot handle the emotions that are there. This probably, again, as I say, is the most basic clash of the sacrifice play. All our drugs have one thing in common. They numb emotions. They were used to be known as a chemical straitjacket on emotion because it didn't fit the circumstances. Basically, what drugs do is help put a lid on it, depress emotion, and have we been barking up the wrong tree? Have we ever been putting the cart before the horse? And you can think of all kinds of other things. Let me just go to the normal, everyday way that we do this. Premature emotional prescriptions can result in emotional restriction. It goads the brain into the sacrifice play and undermines emotional health and development. Now, because we don't use emotional expression without repercussion to attachments as the bottom line in our understanding of an individual, we miss this completely. What do we say to kids? Calm down. Don't be upset. Get a hold of yourself. Go to your room until you can control yourself. Settle down. Be good. Be positive. Be kind. Be nice. Can't you be happy? You've got a lot of things to be happy about. what are we doing? We are goading the brain into the sacrifice play. Now, when you consider that almost all our social emotional learning programs are, what is the thing you say most? Calm down, consider others. Whether we do it formally or not, you see the problem. Now, what is the effect? Well, what are we looking at? It's self-control that we are aiming for. The focus, when we teach it as a life skill, whether it is with the constructs and language of self-regulation, emotional intelligence, or empathy, we're teaching it as a self-control, and we're asking individuals to manage their emotions. Well, that's not the first priority of nature, is to manage them. That will come in place if all conditions are conducive. That becomes a priority of the 6 and 7-year-old. But what if somebody has never got to the start? They can be 60 or 70 years of age and not be there because nobody has gone to the beginning. So that, remember, self-control is a spontaneous fruit of healthy emotional development. You will see this spontaneously in a healthy 6-year-old when they feel many of their emotions, when they have names for them, and when they can be freely expressed without repercussions to their relationship. See, the problem is that we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's always been the problem with from a developmental point of view, is we're in a hurry. We look to see the fruit is not there. And so what can we do to work directly at the fruit? Well, from a learning theory, you look at what it is that you want to shape, what it is that you want to do there, and you reinforce any acts that approximate that. So is he more empathetic, more considerate? Is there more self-management? Is he, et cetera, et cetera? And you reinforce that. You say, oh, good on you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what are we doing? Well, we are actually reinforcing the sacrifice play of the brain. And we wonder why our mental health problems with children are going through the roof. Half of Canadians 40 years or older are qualify for a diagnosis at one time or another of a mental disorder. There aren't that's ridiculous. Something is basically going wrong. And we know emotions are the heart of the matter, so it has to do with emotions. And this is right at the beginning, right at the beginning. So what does it do? Of course, when the brain hears, calm down, be nice, be calm, don't be upset. The brain goes to the only thing it can do. This child's relations can't handle it. The adults that this child needs can't handle the emotions that are there. We got to pull back, because what this child needs for survival is togetherness. And if emotions are getting in the way, we got to sacrifice emotion for instinct. So we actually bring the child down to a more instinctual level, which is to be good, to be nice, because you can't afford to be otherwise. And then people like Gabor Mate come to say, oh my goodness, when he studies chronic illness, we've got niceness at the core. People who have been nice and there is no authenticity there. It also speaks to that sacrifice play. And so, of course, unless it moves, we're not going to name it. We don't have the feelings. If emotions aren't felt, they won't mix. And so now we're going to have all kinds of problems, which means that people up the ante in terms of programs, and there's no fruit of being fully human and humane. Nice and neurotic, yes, nice and neurotic, or all kinds of behavior problems, or all kinds of diagnosis, but we don't get full potential being realized. So children are dependent upon us to find ways that their emotions can be safely expressed and to provide safe sanctuary for their feelings. Feelings need safe sanctuary, and it should be our first step. The first step is the most important. Emotional expression without repercussion to relationships. If the child doesn't experience that, it's going to suffer all the way around. The third step is most important. We must not take for granted that we can see all kinds of evidence of emotion that a child automatically feels their emotion. And so I'll just give you an example. For instance, like these are the two things that are required for step 1 and step 2, safe attachments. The research is unequivocal in this. Is what allows us to feel, allows our feelings to come back, is safe attachments that are safe in the sense that expression can be done without repercussions, without alienating, without sanctions, and so on. And the other one is emotional playgrounds. In fact, that's probably what we have right as part of our instincts is the instinct to play. It is so important that it's right next to the instinct to breathe. These are so strong instincts, and that instinct is there to take care of the emotions. So the instinct was first, and then it takes care of emotions. That's primarily its result. What does it do? Well, when we look at it, play was never play was about adults in early Greece. It was about emotions, about theater, about stories. It was about about drama. It was about dance, especially music. Why? Because these were the playgrounds for emotion, because they could have full vent for expression. Now, again, we've thrown play under the bus. We think it's about playgrounds, physical playgrounds, but what children do at recess. No, it's not. No. True play is where emotions can be expressed without repercussion to relationships. And if a child isn't having that kind of play, they're going to be in problems. And so when we take frustration to play, for instance, there's two ways. Now, frustration is meant to solve a problem. It meant to solve the problem of the separation a child is facing. So there's a lot of problem-solving energy in frustration. So we could either give opportunity for that in playful construction, building something, creating something, solving some problems, or through playful destruction. Wise parents, wise teachers make room for both. I remember coming across when we were in Maui, a father who brought his two children who were obviously having great difficulty. They spent 3 hours building an amazing sandcastle. And then at noon, as if it changed, they spent the next 5 minutes destroying it. And I don't know what more the children enjoyed more. I asked the father, when did you ever come to this idea? And he said, oh, we could never get through the rest of the day if I didn't give room for this constructing energy and destructing energy. So you are a very wise parent. A very wise parent says to their children, I can see there's upset there. There's emotion there. I can see there's frustration. That needs to be expressed. Here, let me help you get it out in ways that won't get you into trouble. That is the template. That's where we always start. I see this is in you. It's okay. It's not going to break our relationship. I see it's in you. It needs to be expressed. Let me help you find a way. That ought to be our modus operandi. You can see it's the opposite of what is happening in social emotional programs. And frustration is one of the most difficult emotions to manage. And you can't manage an emotion you don't feel. And you can't manage an emotion that just erupts and gets away on you. So you've got to have a playground for this that buys you time so that you can actually feel it. And you have mixed feelings. It's when the child has mixed feelings that self-control will automatically come. I saw this picture and it just reminded me so much of, we because emotions have they're on purpose, but there's so much waste energy, right? They can only solve so many problems. We're a very complex society, and they're automatically programmed. And so I saw this outhouse. Emotions, in other words, need an outhouse. And so this, it's like the cats and the dogs and whatever it is. We need some place for our emotions to go that's safe. And so I saw the outhouses play really, and for emotional health as well. well as relational success, we must relieve ourselves of our emotions without disturbing our relations. That's our challenge, and our children need us for that. Our children need us absolutely. That's where we need to retreat to. If we could figure this out, nature can do the rest, but that's what we need to figure out. Well, let me go through then just to review this and go to some of the applications. You see, nature's answer to self-control is not a matter of pitting will against emotion. This will backfire as it hampers emotional expression and awareness. Oh, goodness, do we know that? The stiff upper lip, pitting will against emotion, that's not the answer. That's a recipe for depression. It's not a set of skills that can be learned. This is what we need to get now. It's not a set of skills that can be learned. It will not develop if the underlying steps or foundations have not been laid and the conditions are conducive. It does not respond to the direct approach to taking shortcuts, putting pressure on the child for results. One of the worst things we could ever say is calm down. Calm down. Oh my goodness, if my wife said that to me, it would be absolutely explosive. The emotions need room. The more space it has, the more you calm down. And so putting pressure on the child for results, these non-developmental approaches can do much more harm than good. And then just to bring it home, nature's answer to self-control is jeopardized by aiming for it directly. It's not a behavioral approach. The developmental answer, nature's answer, where desired behavior is rewarded and undesirable is sanctioned. It's not a calm down approach where the agenda is not to be stirred up. Emotion is trying, nature is trying to stir us up. The brain is trying to stir us up to honor it. It's not a get a hold of yourself approach. It's not a distancing approach where one aims for equanimity and perspective. This will happen as a result of development and reflection. This is not what is to be aimed for. It's not a cut it out approach where the emotion or the emotion-driven behavior is seen to be the problem. It's not a rational or cognitive approach where one tries to trump emotion with reason or alter emotion by changing thinking. And it's not, and I repeat, not a learning approach where skills are taught to manage the emotions. The second reason for backing away from skill-based and calm down approaches to emotional upset and management is that it actually interferes with one of the most important feelings and processes of the unfolding of human potential, and that's adaptation. Emotional adaptation, not defensive adaptation, emotional adaptation that transforms us from inside out when we are up against things that do not work, when we encounter futility. Now, the most important thing that the brain has to feel its way through, and I will emphasize here the word feeling. It has to feel its way through, not think its way through. The brain is like a maze, and it is operating at the level where it has to feel its way through. This didn't work, that didn't work. And so it has to feel the futility. Now, the outward manifestation of that futility could be tears, it is sadness. There's many reasons for children to cry other than sadness. But that probably is the best word we have, is when we define sadness is a feeling of futility. It won't work. It can't work. I can't get through that way. And there's no reason for the brain to foster adaptation when things work. The only reason when it doesn't work, but the brain doesn't know that. You know, your most loved one can die. The brain can't adapt by that by simply knowing they've died. The brain has to feel the futility of filling that hole with anything other. And if you do, it's tears that fill the hole, and it adapts. It's an emotional process. That's true from day one of birth. until we face the inevitable, our death, is that sadness is the most important emotion for us to feel. It is the emotion, it's been thrown under the bus, pathologized by the doctrine of disorder. Sadness is huge, and it is what transforms us from inside out. There is no transformation without it in terms of healing. I see it like an hourglass, now symbolized in terms of tears. The Greeks did this, but we can cry to all kinds of other things: upset, smoke in our eyes, onions. We can cry to things. These are the tears that come, or the sadness that come, in a symbolic way, when we feel the futility that's been encountered. Single most important for the realization of our full potential. And the fruit is amazing. Relief, reset, renewal, resolution of emotions, emotional rest. It's the only way we can actually let go of things. Recovery of the capacity for fulfillment and happiness. That is, happiness lies on the other side of tears that have not been shed. The pursuit of happiness is so misinformed. It takes away the path there of sadness, develops resilience as strength results from facing and feeling futility. It's the key to resilience and a key to restoring hope and perspective. This is the hidden work of sadness. Again, sadness has been pathologized. It's used as synonymous with depression, with despair, which is dreadful, because we no longer then have the word that we need, which is the feeling of futility, to feel the futility that is encountered, to be moved to our sadness. And so these things happen to us. This is a sense of stress. All of these events happen to kids all the time, happen to kids in school, happen to kids in family. All of these are some variation of facing separation, which is highly emotionally provocative. It evokes alarm and frustration, intensified pursuit. Oh, well, the brain has a plan that is when futility of changing these things, when I can't change being rejected or having lost face, it's happened, what has happened in the past, or the disapproval, when I can't change this, there's nothing left to do but feel sad about it. And that is what leads to this transformation. And so it is huge. The problem with today's teaching of emotional management and consideration is that it interferes with this. Here I have the sine wave. Upset is there for a reason. Yet what do we say? Don't be upset. It's there for a reason. There is reason for upset, and most likely, if the problem can't be solved, and most relationship problems can't, there's nothing left to do but feel the futility of that. That's what's so important, and that's what we need to make space for. Every intuitive movie, every intuitive story, if you look at it, they know a lot better than the mental health experts or the psychologists or all of those of us who have been educated out of our instincts. No, teachers, stay true to what you know to be true, that makes sense to you. Is the story there needs to be room for some sadness. This is the pivotal turning point. But what do we do instead? Oh my goodness. Be calm, teach tranquility. You've got to think happy thoughts, resist the letdown, focus on managing the emotion, think positive, confront irrationality, on and on it goes. What do? We're trying to push this back up, you see, going against upset rather than with the flow. With the flow would bring us to the natural resolution. When you're intuitive about this, oh my goodness, you say, oh, I can see you're upset. That upset needs some place to go. You know, why don't you stay a little bit after class? And you just give a little bit of words. That upset was just too much for you today. And a little bit of arm around it. Oh my goodness, if there is any readiness or softness at all, the tears start coming, and you can feel what nature is doing is a process of adapting to the things that cannot be changed. It is amazing. And social emotional learning programs, most of our programs that focus on emotional management are actually going in the opposite direction they need. They need to go. So what are our lessons? Well, the 5 steps as a template for helping students are both for those who get into trouble, that is the aggressive, oppositional, disruptive, impulsive, reactive, agitated, bored, restless, the bullying. These are all emotional problems, including bullying, because you don't feel your vulnerability. You exploit the vulnerability of others. Your own alpha instincts are not paired with caring. The bottom line is you're saying, I don't care, doesn't matter. It's an emotional problem that is at the root of that. Or for those for the troubled, including the very good and the very nice, anxious, distressed, obsessed, depressed, suicidal, alarmed, bullied, dysfunctional, wounded, abused, compulsive, traumatized, and we can go on and on. What are our challenges? Well, first of all, be sensitive to what comes before. What is missing? If you don't see self-control, you'll immediately listen to. Do you ever hear in their writings and their stories at the same time, part of me feels this way and part of me feels that way, I'm feeling ambivalent? Do you hear this? If not, listen a bit closer. Is it that you're just seeing emotion, not that they're not feeling it? Because they would have to feel it. You know, what are the names they use for this? Are the ones that give rise to feelings? Could they be getting into trouble for the way they express it? Both the ones who can't manage it and the ones who manage it far too well. You know, is it backfiring on them? You get to the root of the trouble. As I say, where there's a lot of trouble, it almost always goes back to the beginning. Step-by-step objectives for climbing these steps: invite and embrace. Not calm down, but we've got to find you a safe space. There needs to be room for that. You feel really strongly that frustration was getting away from you, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There needs to be space. You embrace it. And because it's our job to solve the most basic human problem of all, it's our job to satisfy the conflict between emotion and instinct, togetherness and emotional expression. That is, to find a way that these emotions can be expressed without harm to your relations. That's our job. That's our job. So safe expression through bridging, not letting anything come in between, drawing emotions into play. Safe expression becomes the bottom line of any responsible program for emotional health and well-being. Secondly, mirror and model. Don't teach emotional literacy. Be the answer to it. That is, when you're talking about your own frustration that you were having today because you had to either do this or that, and you couldn't do it both. Call it frustration, call it by name. You know, part of me felt like hitting or you know, doing something. I couldn't solve this problem. I needed to have some place for my own sadness about it. Live it, mirror it, model it, use the language for it. Don't divide yet again, teachers and students. We're all in the same boat. We all have the problem with this. We're all creatures of emotion. The more they're attached to you, they'll be beginning to use your own language. If you start saying, no, I really was frustrated to, you know, something didn't work for me. Those kids that are attached to you, within 2 weeks, they'll be using the same language. It doesn't need a formal program. No, what it needs is mirroring and modeling in the context of attachment. Feeling, removing the blocks, giving safe spaces, make it safe, provide the space to feel it. Feelings come back after there's been a time of stress. They need space to come back, a place to come back. So think, when would this child have space? You may introduce writing for this. You may introduce some things, but think of the space. Draw out the mixed feelings. Oh, isn't that the way it is? Oh, part of us, wants this, and I'm alarmed, but then I want this to happen. And so you've got this thing about, desire in you and something about alarm. Like this can go through every curriculum. It can be in math and science and literature. It should be us. It should be us. It can be a program too. Yes, it can be a program. And support the reflection. Lots of sport for this, the materials, the inner experiencing, and the relationship with it. But the bottom line is you've got to start at the beginning. Now, remember, play is huge in this. After putting all the pieces together, many play theorists, well, not many, there are a few of the gray hairs, and I am one of them, who am absolutely convinced that play was nature's gift to us to take care of our emotions so that we didn't injure our relationships. And that is why all the classic emotional playgrounds, finding a place for our emotions, nothing could be important. And so matchmaking them to the play they need, the music, the drawings, the dance, the safety inherent in play allows for expression. So not calm down, but how can we take it to play? How can we take it to play? What kinds of things do your emotions come out? Making a story, reading a story, dance. Recognition of emotion is much easier in the play mode, as emotion is self-regulated. By nature, it's self-regulated in play. And so that's much easier. It's much better than talking about self-regulation. Play reverses the inhibition of feelings, because in play, we're safe to feel. Sets the stage for dissonance as play automatically engages. The desire is already there, so it sets us up for mixed feelings. Play is so important. So matchmaking to playgrounds. When I think of helping troubled students in the context of school, before trying to create a program, I think it's really important to get the feel of this. What are we trying to do? Because when you create a program, it becomes about the program rather than doing this individually. In my mind, when you have a student who presents as troubled, or getting into trouble, the idea would be is to get the teacher, the staff person, to cultivate a safe, working student-adult relationship where the adult is able to get the support of 2 or 3 others on staff. And then just slowly brainstorm your way up on the steps. Say, well, first of all, I know there has to be expression without repercussion. So let's see what we can do there. And then let's see what we can do in terms of mirroring and modeling in the context of relationship, the language of the heart. Provide timely access to safe sanctuaries where feelings can catch up. I could guarantee you that if you had a number of individuals on staff willing to do this with a particular student, that you have their heart and your heart goes out to them, that when you build this in its real organic way, that then you could put into a program that really would make a difference and would reach those who really needed to be reached most. But you can't just, you got to have the dance, and you get the feel of this dance. And this dance is for everyone, for every teacher, adult, staff member who has a heart for a student who is in emotional trouble. Now, I just wanted to put this slide here because it's actually our ending slide other than our title slide here. Because although our goal is a good relationship to emotion, we start off with our own relationship to their emotions. And if we don't invite their emotions, make room for the expression, if we don't find names that they can use that are not pejorative, if we don't have a good relationship with their emotions, how in the world are we going to expect them to have a good relationship with their own emotions? Isn't this is what it is about? Isn't emotional health and well-being is about having a good relationship with one's own emotions? And then the final finishing touch, the fruit of it is a student has a better relationship to others. Consideration, empathy become the result of a child who has found a good relationship with their own emotions. We're putting relationships with others before. Being nice, being kind is putting relationships with others before they even have a relationship with their own emotions. And we need to start with ours. So this is the developmental process is absolutely brilliant. There is so much intelligence in this, so much. But the developmental process requires that we back off symptoms to what comes before. And for the most part, we'll find yourself retreating right to the beginning. It's better to start at the beginning because we play safe that way. And if we start at the fruit, we will risk the earlier stages of development and walk a child right into the problems that plague so many adults today. So hopefully this can give you a little bit of an idea of the brilliance of the developmental design, and to have some relaxation about it, that nature already has a plan. Our job is to work with it. We don't need to get ahead of it. We don't need to work against it. We are simply midwives to work with it.